No, I'm not talking.
Hi everyone, welcome to a Monday Fixed with us from Goa. We were having a slight tech issue with getting Arshia in the room, and I think she's just joined us. I think Arshia is here, and I can see Arshia. Arshia, can you put your camera on, please? And then she's just connecting. 1 second. And her audio is connected. Hi, Arshia. Hi, you're mute. Yeah. Okay,
Ah, Arshia.
Oh, my goodness. Where am I?
Yes.
Oh, here I am. Okay.
We're all here. We're all here.
All right. Sorry. Old lady blues, I'm guessing. Okay. Here we are.
So just very quickly, welcome everyone. We are really excited because this is our second in a series of reading the Ramayana by Moonlight with Arshia and Imran, and the session last in September. It was such a great and exciting session that we actually were lucky enough to find a Monday, a full moon Monday, which is today, and for a lot of you, I really Arshia really doesn't need an introduction. But I think I must sort of, for the people who are new in the group, Arshia is an Indian translator, facilitator, author, and director. She did a PhD in South Asian languages from the University of Chicago in the 1990s under the great Wendy Doniger, and she's written abridged translations of the epic Sanskrit text Katha Saridasagara and Valmiki Ramayana. And she taught for a long time at the UWC Pune. That's how I know her, because a lot of my really amazing friends have studied under her, and also ran Open Space in Pune, which is how I think Imran knows her, correct? And Imran is my very dear friend, sitting in his house in Nashinola right now, writing a lovely book about the Ramayana. And we're very excited that Imran and Arshia are going to take us through another round of discussion and tell us stories. So Imran, here. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Alok, and thus for inviting us to do this. Yeah. Hi, Arshia.
Hello again, Imran.
Hi. I feel like I've seen more of you in this lockdown
This
period
is the
than
most we've seen each other
Yeah, I
in
think
a long
so.
time.
In a very, very long time. Yeah. So for today's session, Arshia and I thought what we would do is that we would kind of talk about our favorite passages in the Ramayana. And Arshia will read you through a very close literary reading. What I think that this is part of two sessions. We're having two sessions. So for the first one, what we thought we would do is talk a lot more about the form of the Ramayana as kavya or as poetry. Because I think that the first time I read the Ramayana with Arshia, we started thinking about it as poetry, and it completely changes the way in which you want to get into the narrative and sort of get under the skin of this story that has fascinated people for 2,500 years. So, Arshia, I thought I would start with the first book, the book of childhood. Yeah. So I'm going to read a little bit of it. I'll just give you a little context from where we've left off. Valmiki is in his hermitage. And Narada has appeared, and in conversation, Valmiki has asked Narada, who is the most righteous man? And of course, it is Rama. And Narada tells him the story, or tells him a story of the Ramayana, and leaves the story with Valmiki. Soon after this, Valmiki goes to have a bath in the river, and this is what happens. The great sage Valmiki and his disciples honored and praised Narada when he had finished his story. Narada bade them farewell, ascended into the skies, and returned to the realm of the...
Imran, your audio is a little bit low. Can you, you're not very audible.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
Just say something now, please.
Now can you hear me?
Much better.
Much better. Little bit louder? Okay. Oh. Aha. Are we good now?
Better, much better. Thanks.
Great. Sorry
about that.
Wait, you and I are both having some weird technical things with Zoom today.
It's the moon.
It's the moon. Okay, so Valmiki went to the banks of the river Tamasa, not far from the Ganga. He gazed at the calm, clear waters of the river and said to his disciple who was standing behind him, "Look at these clear waters, Bharadwaja. They are as calm, as serene as the mind of a good man. I want to bathe here, child. Put down your pot and fetch me my clothes." Valmiki, who had controlled his senses, took the garment and walked around, enjoying the beauty of the verdant forests. Valmiki came upon two sweet Krancha birds making love. He saw a cruel hunter shoot the male, and the gold-crested bird fell to the ground. When his mate saw that he was dead, she cried out piteously. Compassion welled up in Valmiki's heart when he saw the fallen bird killed so unrighteously, and the grief of its mate. Deeply moved, he said, "Hunter, because you have killed this bird while he was making love, you shall never find a resting place." As soon as he had spoken, Valmiki thought to himself, "What are these words I have uttered in my grief for the bird?" Learned and wise, the sage said to his disciple, "My words came forth in a meter of 4 feet with equal syllables that can be sung to the notes of the veena. Since this meter arose from my grief, let it henceforth be known as shloka." Bharadwaja committed the new meter uttered by his teacher to memory, and Valmiki was deeply satisfied. So this is very much like how the narrative begins, but it also kind of points to a lot of clues that we can look for now in thinking about the Ramayana or as we go forward. Arshia, I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about this passage.
Well, it's a fabulous passage on many levels, but I think the first thing we need to remind ourselves of that this is from the book of the childhood, the Balakanda, which we know was composed later, right, along with the Uttarakanda. So it's important that Valmiki gets set into the outer frame of the story, because now he's saying, I'm going to tell you this story. And the first thing he does is he teaches it to Rama's sons. And he tells them, go recite this story on the highways and the byways, recite it until you reach Rama. And the kids do that. So a very important thing happens. They start to tell Rama the story, and we are listening to the story at the same time as Rama is. And that is a tremendously sophisticated literary conceit, right? That we are simultaneously the internal and the external audience for the telling of this story. So that's a great trick, and it's something that I've never actually quite recovered from. But there are a couple of other things that are going on here. First of all, it tells you, I am a poem, right? And whatever else is going on with the text currently in our political lives and in our literary lives and in our religious lives, why are we, everything, the text says, the text says. Well, the text is telling you it's a poem.
Yeah.
Why are you telling us it's something else? It can be a religious poem. It can be a poem about the acts of God in the world of humans. It can be all of those things, but it is a poem, right? The other thing that is that Ramanujan pointed out to us when A.K. Ramanujan, the poet and translator, who was also one of my teachers, and as you can imagine, a very, very important teacher who's left an impress on my mind, thank God. It's an impress I'm very delighted to have. Actually, sorry, this was not from Ramanujan, this was from Wendy. Another great teacher who left an impress on my mind. She said, look what happens, right? In an epic, when an animal is killed, you know that something momentous is going to occur, right? So we open with the killing of two loving croncha birds. Croncha birds are cranes. The Saras cranes, and the mythology of the Saras crane across the world, not simply in India, is that they mate for life, right? So we know that we're going to hear a love story. We know we're going to hear a love story that is going to involve sadness, tragedy. The love story that we hear, which is a love story of Rama and Sita, nobody dies. I mean, they're not separated because of death, but they're separated because of something much worse in a way. It's because of human behavior, human action, human emotions, right? So we are very much in the epic world when we start with the death of an animal, right? So that's an important thing to note. And what Ramanujan taught us was that he said, look what this separation is telling us, right? We're going to hear a story of viraha, right? So and it's not just viraha between Rama and Sita. It is a story about multiple people who will be separated from the ones that they love, which includes Dasharatha, Bharata, Kaikeyi, Lakshmana. Nearly everybody in the story cannot be with their beloved, or the person that, beloved doesn't mean your conjugal partner, but it is also the love of parents and brothers and sisters and everything. So the killing of the Krancha actually sets the mood for the story. Ramanujan preferred to think of that mood as viraha, but later commentators on literature and aesthetics said that the dominant rasa, the dominant mood of the Ramayana was karuna, compassion, because it is born from Valmiki's compassionate reaction to watching the grief of a surviving couple of creatures that loved each other. So it's a very, very potent incident. And it's an incident that really needs to be unpacked in various ways. And it's just as well for us that we have indigenous commentators, Sanskritists, over centuries telling us that the emotion is is karuna. And then we have sort of non-indigenous commentators, even though Ramanujan was completely Indian in so many ways, giving us yet another way to parse this incident. So, and of course, for even if you don't want to get into the meaning of what the Krancha birds might symbolize, we have to acknowledge the fact that Valmiki spoke in poetry, and I think that's just, it's so moving. It's the place of a poet.
Absolutely.
In society. And even in Rig Veda, I think we talked about this last time as well. In Rig Veda, the first Rig Vedic hymn, Rig Veda 1.1, is a hymn to Agni. And and all the things they're asking Agni for, they say, praise the poet Agni. Yeah, and I cannot imagine something more elevating for acts of literature, right, where the poet is placed front and center. In Rig Veda, which you can't get earlier than that for our literature, and in Ramayana, which is the most important text of Hindu culture, really. All our cultures, when we live in India, we're all involved with Ramayana. As you and I are, Imran. Look
exactly.
At us.
Yeah. No, I thought this was really interesting, thinking about like dominant rasas, where one is of Karuna and other people believe that it's Viraha. Could you say that that the rasa that you see will be dependent on how you choose to read the text? Like, does the reader
or the other way around?
Or the other way around?
Yeah.
The reader plays a huge. And I think the other thing that also, of course, the killing of the animal, we see this, what you call foreshadowing, because we see this happen with Dasharatha, and it sets off a chain of crazy events like soon after that. The other thing that I also wanted to say.
And let us not forget the killing of the golden deer.
Of course.
The killing of the golden deer.
Yeah.
The
biggest. Yeah.
Yeah, catalytic event in the story. Yeah. But I do want to say one thing, that this idea of rasa and text being dominated, or all sort of aesthetic creation and experience being dominated by a single emotion, is very, very late. So we read rasa back into a story that was already not simply extant, but very, very popular. So I think it's possible, as most of us do, and as certainly people who read Ramayana who do not belong to this culture, you can read the Ramayana qua Ramayana. It is still a beautiful, incredible story. And depending on who you are and when in your life you read this text, you will see it as one of Viraha, you'll see it as one of Karuna,
Absolutely.
One of Virya. It's a heroic text, Shringara, it's a love story. And that really, really depends on the reader. So.
That's true. I was also thinking about this, is that what I really love about this passage is that it kind of also places the text in us understanding it as an oral story. It's an oral narrative. Also because Lava and Kusha, when you combine the words, means wandering bards. And I find that super interesting to be able to use that as to have double meaning. The other thing that I want to talk about a little bit over here was, I remember when we first did one of our early conversations, the Ramayana, you talked about the Mobis Trip. And that idea has been stuck in my head.
What?
The Mobis Trip. Do you remember the Mobis? Which is stuck in my head since then, because the Ramayana is like a Mobis Trip. You're inside and outside the narrative.
At the same time. Like Valmiki. We are
exactly.
Valmiki. He is both inside the text and outside the text. And because he's the one who tells the story, and yet the story then becomes independent of him, as it were. And of course, he returns in the Uttarakanda at a very, very critical and extremely powerful moment, which is when he has to validate Sita's conduct and legitimate Rama's sons. The first thing he says is, when Sita comes back, he says, "These are your sons, Rama," because Rama is like, "Who is this? Whose story are you?" Which is like, okay, really? Whose story is this? But the other very important thing to remember is Rama, he asks the question, whose story is this? When they come to the part, when they say Sita was banished into the forest. Right? And then he's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
is this really?
Yeah.
So he recognizes himself not by his great successes, but by his great failures. And
Yeah.
I think that's something we can all think about, for
Yeah.
ourselves as well. That we measure our lives not in coffee spoons,
Not in
right?
coffee
As
spoons.
would have us do,
Yeah.
but maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Because also this is something I've always wondered is that, and I think you and I have talked about this, is that the tense also changes towards the end, where it becomes present tense. And that is a fascinating device when you think about it, because it changes also it, because you are suddenly inside this narrative. You are no longer looking at this narrative behind you.
You are part of the stillness that occurs when Sita disappears into the earth.
Yeah.
It seems as if time has stopped. Everybody's paralyzed, and so are you
Yeah.
as a reader, because you're just like, oh my goodness. So the thing is, what happens, I think, with many of us, we know the story, or we think we know the story. So of course we never read the text, right? And because we think we know the story already, we think we're beyond surprise. So the text cannot actually surprise us anymore. The text cannot test us anymore. But when you read any Ramayana in translation, or if you have, the opportunity to read it in the original, the text will stun you. And this is one of the moments that is absolutely stunning, And I mean, we also think so often that, literary conceits, tricks of form and structure are modern and postmodern, and they've been created in the 20th century by writers from other cultures. No, man, really, I mean, I don't like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't like
Yeah.
this argument. We did it first, but hell yeah, we did it first.
We did it.
Yeah. Mahabharata as well. So when we do rah about the text from our past and the stories from our past, we're just picking the wrong things to be superior about, really.
Is the Mahabharata similar in that way, in what it does? Because there's Sanjaya in that,
Yeah, it's similar and it's different. It's similar and different because Vyasa, who is the teller of the tale, but we are not hearing it from
Sorry,
Vyasa.
guys, I just have to interject. Both of your sound is dropping.
Oh.
Arshia, do you have a earphone or something that you can plug?
Do I have headphones? Yeah.
That'd be good, actually. That'd be really good.
Hang on a minute.
Sorry about that, guys. Thanks so much.
Okay, is that better?
Hello?
Yes. Is that better for everybody else as well? I'm sorry?
It is better, yes. Slightly better.
Okay, good.
Yeah?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to move closer to my laptop.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
All I'm seeing is my face as big as a pugaya, so I keep moving.
We were talking about the Mahabharata. Yeah.
Why is Vyasa different? Well, here's the thing. So Vyasa tells the story, but we don't hear Vyasa telling the story, right? He tells it to Vaishampayana, who recites it at Janamantha sacrifice. Grishabas hears it. He comes out, Shaunaka, it's and the very important thing about the Mahabharata is that when it describes itself, it calls itself Itihasa, which in all modern Indian languages we understand very simply to mean history. But Itihasa literally in Sanskrit, if you break up the words, means so it was said. So the orality of the Mahabharata is established in a different way. Also, of course, we're not hearing the story from Valmiki, we're hearing the story from Rama's sons, from Lava and Kusha. But Vyasa is inside the story because he actually makes the people who the story is about. Valmiki has a very different function. He really is the frame of the story that he tells, because he appears only in Balakanda and in Uttarakanda, the first book and the last. Um, so that's why we are able to have this Mobius strip moment, the simultaneous inside and outside, the single surface in which we experience the story. And Vyasa, I mean, you could argue Vyasa has a stake in the story that he tells, because he's talking about his grandchildren, literally his grandchildren. So Bhishma Pitamaha is not Pitamaha at all. How could he be? He's celibate. The Pitamaha really is Vyasa. And in that sense, I mean, Valmiki stays well outside the story that he's telling. He's a sage who lives in the forest. He has no skin in the game in the way that Vyasa really does. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Because I think I also wanted to maybe talk a little bit about this. I think what you mentioned earlier is that we should always remember that the first and the last book of the Ramayana are later editions. And so Valmiki is inserted at a much later date. And do you think that kind of opens up the Ramayana a little bit to thinking about authorship as well? In terms of... Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Very much so. It's hard for us to imagine an authorless text, but the way text production occurred during the epic period, not simply in our culture, but in cultures across the world, so they were very fluid, they were very open. I mean, we can argue that, well, there's more to establish Homer as a historical person than there is to establish Valmiki or Vyasa as historical entities. And what I think, again, is so powerful in terms of literary moments is when you have a putative author that is inside the text that he is allegedly telling. That's amazing. I mean, Don Quixote comes close to that, Cervantes and Don Quixote. But, I mean, Derrida, really think about this. If you want to talk about like intentionality and reader response, all the things that we so quickly absorb from Western critical theory without actually looking at our own texts and seeing that they have a completely different understanding of what it means to be an author, what it means to create a text. And it is true that epics, perhaps more than any other text, were created by many, many, many minds, many poets over many centuries. But as I was reading something that Wendy wrote recently, and she says, whoever added to the text was not a fool. That person already knew the whole text and knew what was possible to add, and what would enhance the text rather than detract from it. Yes. So it's not like, I mean, it's really not like, acha chal, I think we should put this here. No, it's
Absolutely.
So, the texts are very complex for all these reasons. Also very important when we think about authors being created later, like Valmiki and Vyasa and all like that. Look at what has happened to the legend of Valmiki, right? He has a whole backstory of his own.
Absolutely.
He was a daku, he was in the forest, used to like rob people. And one time, because he had a family to look after, and somebody asked him, why are you stealing like this? And he said, because I have to take care of my family. And that person said, is your family going to share all the bad karma that you're getting from doing that? He goes back and asks his family, and they say, no, sorry, we'll take the stuff, but not the karma. And he starts to meditate. And the word he uses to meditate is mara, 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 mara. If you say it, 5 times, it becomes Rama, Rama, Rama. And this anthill develops around him. And the anthill is called a Valmik. So he becomes a Valmiki. And now, even, I mean, there's nothing in India that can't get politicized. There's a caste of Valmiks. And they are getting increasingly vocal. And they are a Dalit caste, which I also find very interesting, because if they're holding to the idea that Valmiki was an outsider, that he wasn't some Brahmin guy, that he truly was somebody from the margins, and that makes it interesting, because then Valmiki and the hunter, who he's so angry with, are actually both marginalized people.
Yeah.
Which, which is amazing when you think that the text that is becoming more and more Brahminical, more and more Brahmanized, actually starts with people who are well outside
of the
Chaturavarna.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I'm sure the people that you work with, the stories that you are collecting, are not from Brahmin groups at all. No, they're
absolutely
from all kinds of margins.
Yeah, but this is what I've always loved about the Ramayana, and about the different kinds of narratives that we have about it, is that it always picks up on the things that are not said in the text, and that it's able to take those stories and run with those stories and create new ones. And I think just to talking about different kinds of stories, do you remember that great story you once told me from the Adhimatya Ramayana as an example to show how the Ramayana is conscious of itself?
Knows itself. Yeah, that's a great story. It's from a 14th century, maybe 12th century, but definitely a millennium and a half after what we think of as Valmiki Ramayana. And before the Adhyatma Ramayana shows up, there are many, many Ramayanas, many great Ramayanas, many lesser Ramayanas, many canonical Ramayanas, many non-canonized Ramayanas. And in Adhyatma Ramayana, the story is that, Rama says to Sita, listen, darling, I have to go to the forest. I've been exiled by my father and you can't come with me. And she's like, why not? He says, well, the forest is a terrible place. It has, the lions are roaring and there are, nasty little things that bite you and sting you and you're a princess and you'll be so uncomfortable. And she says, no, I'll come with you. And, hundreds of arguments go on. And finally, Sita says to him, she said, Rama, have you ever heard of any Ramayana in which Sita doesn't go with you to the forest? And that's the clincher. And he said, okay, you can come with me. It's beautiful. It's absolutely magnificent. Piece of intertextuality, of tradition acknowledging itself. Another Mobis Strip moment, because you're inside a Ramayana that is telling you what happens outside
of it. Yeah, I always go back to that story when I'm thinking about the stories that I'm documenting. Also, I always go back to that one. Okay, shall we read the next passage from your translation? Do you want me to read it? I'll read it.
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, cool. So this is from the third book, the Book of Wilderness, or Aranyakanda. And Arshia and I kind of chose two very separate passages. One is Sita's abduction and one is Rama discovering that Sita has gone. Ravana, king of the Rakshasas, pounced on Sita as she wept, her clothes crumpled and her ornaments in disarray. Let go, he shouted as she clung to the trees like a climbing vine and rolled on the ground. Rama, Rama, she wailed in the empty forest as the Rakshasa, who looked like death, pulled her by the hair and called his own death upon his head. Ravana dragged her into the sky as she cried out to Rama and Lakshmana. With her glowing golden skin and her cloths of yellow silk, the princess looked like a bolt of lightning. As her yellow garments fluttered in the wind and the red lotuses from her garden scattered over him, Rama's face blazed like a mountain on fire. Golden Sita, held tight against Ravana's black body, was like a golden belt around an enormous black elephant. Sita's flowers fell from her body as she was being dragged away, and they showered upon the earth like rain. They seemed to follow Ravana like a train, pulled along by the speed of his flight. The flowers followed him like a garland of stars which follows Mount Meru. As Ravana carried her further into the sky, Sita shone with her own splendor like a comet. Her necklace of sparkling pearls slipped between her breasts and fell to the earth like Ganga descending from the sky. And
now tell me this text is not a poem. Yeah, really. I mean, if this is not poetry and if this is not exalted images,
and it just gets better. It just gets better. It just gets better and better. And now I'm going to read, I think, my favorite part of the Ramayana, and I also think maybe Arshia's favorite part. So Rama has come back to their home and he's discovered that Sita is missing. But though he searched high and low, Rama could not find his beloved in the forest. His eyes red from weeping, he seemed like a madman as he ran from tree to tree, from the mountains to the rivers, weeping more and more as he plunged deeper and deeper into the ocean of grief. O Kadamba tree, have you seen my beloved who loved your fruit so? Tell me if you know where that lovely woman is. Bilva tree, where is she, the woman whose breasts are like your fruits, who is as delicate as your new shoots in her yellow silks? O palm tree, take pity on me and tell me if you have seen the beautiful woman. Rose apple tree, my beloved's complexion has the hues of your fruit. You must have seen her. Tell me where she is. Little dear, you must know where the doe-eyed Sita is. Is she with you in the forest? O best of elephants, Sita had thighs like your trunk. You must know where she is. O Lakshmana, have you seen my beloved anywhere? O Sita, my darling Sita, where have you gone? He cried over and over again. Rama called out as he ran hither and thither in the forest. He leapt and jumped and spun around as if he were crazy. He could not hold still for a moment, so he ran through the forest, over the mountains, and down to the streams and rivers. But though he searched every corner of that forest, he found no trace of his beloved. Still, he would not give up his renewed efforts to find her. Yeah. This always breaks my heart, just like a little tiny bit every time I
It
do
does.
this. No, it's just
Yeah. And it
um,
really, every time we think about, when we think, oh, he didn't love her, oh, he was so easily persuaded by other people. No, he's crazy in love for her,
yeah.
And the other thing that I find is so so moving, because what is he doing? He's recreating her.
Yeah.
Nail by nail,
Absolutely.
hair by
Yeah.
hair, by her, her eyes, her breasts, her thighs. He's conjuring up his beloved, his absent beloved. And I find that so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, Sita, you were a nice person. No, because what he's missing is her physicality, and we know that when we lose people that we love, what actually takes us the longest time to get over is that there is
Absolutely.
your bed is suddenly very big,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever there's a space
Yeah.
that is that nobody else can fill. So
Yeah.
the fact that he's remembering her so physically, I find very, very moving. Yeah.
And also this, I think, like for me always it's about the idea of this natural world and the memories of a natural world.
Yes.
And to be able to see our the absence of our beloveds in these things, because of course they're seasonal and it's going to change, but they will always remain constant in that way of absence,
Yep.
And I think also I think this book, the Aranyakanda part of the Ramayana, is I think the most important, because it is that moment when everything will change. And I think even reading this now, I feel thinking about Rama. This is an imagination of Rama that none of us, unless you've read the Ramayana, have, because he's become so politicized. And even the way we think about him now is good and evil. But this is really of a lover, a distraught lover.
Yeah. And it's one of the few moments in the book where he is so completely human, because our complaint against Rama is like, oh, he doesn't show his emotions. Oh, he's so opaque. Oh, we don't know what he's thinking. It's like, here it is, man, with brass knobs on. You cannot be feeling and thinking more deeply than this this moment of just, distress. No, it's huge. It's huge. And in a way, what you said about the natural world and all, even the natural world is not enough to contain his panic at the fact that he might have lost her,
Because also I think in your translation there's this really beautiful thing which you do, is that I think that the two things that he does, like the physical things that he does, running from mountains and rivers, because those are repeated twice, I think the anxiety that's built up through what she's going through really comes through.
Yeah. There's some of us may have seen Shyam Benegal's Bharat Ek Khoj, Discovery of India on TV and all that. And it's a wonderful thing because he uses history and mythology sort of interchangeably. And Ramayana is part of our cultural history, even if it isn't part of our evidentiary history. And he has the scene where Rama comes to the forest and he sees the abandoned, he comes back to the abandoned hut. And Salim Ghaus, who's the actor, he's kind of wandering in this daze and he's saying these words, Kadamba tree or Bilva tree and all. So Benegal and, Shama Zaidi have obviously done their homework.
Yeah.
But there is no passion in that scene, man. It's melancholic, but this is not melancholia. This is like verging on madness, know. And I think that's a very, very important part of how we need to understand Rama's feelings for his wife, which we usually just dismiss.
Yeah. And also be able to see him as human, because he is human all this while, until he realizes later that he's not. Totally. Also, I think the Book of Wilderness is really interesting because when I'm thinking about it, it reminds me a lot of Maryada, about reading Maryada. It's about the borders and sort of transgression, because all of Wilderness is about that. It is about transgression.
It is. But all the transgressions are in the forest, right?
Absolutely.
So they have completely different implications. I mean, we know that when there's a transgression in the city, we know what the recompense is. We know what the retribution is, what the so-called punishment is. But in the forest, when we transgress, first of all, we don't think we have transgressed. Forest hai, idhar kya? I can do whatever I want. Or this is the right thing for me to do. To kill a deer, to mutilate a woman who is going to attack me and my wife. But those transgressions are still transgressive. Those actions are still inappropriate. And then, of course, they have these horrifying consequences. Really horrifying.
And I think it's also a great. It's a really important book because we also hear Sita, and we hear many different sides of Sita. Like I was going back and reading your translation, and I realized that there were three huge moments in which she talks. One is, of course, a speech that she gives Rama on carrying weapons. The second is when she speaks to Lakshmana, and which maybe you want to talk about that because it's.
I don't know, man.
Yeah,
it's a tough one.
It's a really tough one to talk about, no? And I find those two like really interesting. That we really begin to see her in a completely different kind of way than we were. Just in the same way, I think that we think of Rama now, as human. And another thing that I kind of noticed, which I wanted to talk to you about, was I realized that the Book of Wilderness is sort of bookended by two Rakshasas who are actually Gandharvas. There is meaning in that, no? Things don't just happen.
Well, in terms of narrative, I mean, the first one, Viradha, is a foreshadowing because he picks up Sita and he places her on his hip. And Rama says, I can't bear this. I cannot bear the idea of any other man touching my wife, right? And that foreshadows two things. It foreshadows Shurpanakha in a way, because they kill Viradha and they mutilate Shurpanakha. But of course, the heavier foreshadowing is Ravana, is the abduction, which actually happens when Rama isn't there. Right? So when he comes back and he realizes that she's abducted, you can imagine what's happening to his imagination. What he's thinking. He says, Rakshasas have eaten her, I mean, basically like where are her bones and her blood, because I'm sure she's been torn apart by Rakshasas. And the other one at the end of the story is Kabanda. And Kabanda, of course, tells him, go to Sugriva. Sugriva will help you. Go to Kishkinda and make friends with the monkeys. But it's also interesting because you have to wonder when these two incidents were inserted into the Rama story, because both Viradha and Kabadha are liberated. They achieve moksha
Yes.
as a result of dying at Rama's hands, which in other Ramayanas foreshadows Ravana's liberation when he dies at Rama's hands. But of course, all this comes from bhakti.
Yes.
And bhakti doesn't appear within the Hindu landscape until about 700 or 800 years after the earliest parts of the Ramayana were put together. What do you make of the book ending of the?
To me, I thought it was quite close to, even though Bhakti Goal comes much later, I think for me it was about the idea that wherever Rama goes, truth will prevail. Because all this while we've kind of seen him with a lot more sort of violence to the outsider, whereas this one, even though there is also but I'm thinking also that there is an earlier episode with Ahalya, which is the same thing.
Oh yeah,
is to free her, and she can only be freed once he touches her.
Yeah. Not Sita, Rama touches her.
Rama, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So there is this. Quite by the time we received the text as a text of 7 books rather than 5 books. Bhakti is lodged in there; it's embedded, and once it's nobody can get it out. Like once God enters the picture, he ain't going nowhere. Very settled. So we are required to take Rama's divinity into account, even when we read this as literature, rather than as mythology or history. I think it's great. It gives us a whole nother aspect to deal with. It challenges the perceptions and imaginations of people like you and me who claim to be atheists, completely separated from the idea that there is God. We might believe in spiritual things or whatever, but and then also we trip up, so many of us, women especially, in the 21st century against the idea of a God like this one, but we can't take it out of the text. So we started this conversation with rasa and the sort of the dominant aesthetic emotions that any work of art contains within itself. And to viraha and karuna, we have to add bhakti. We have to add it,
Absolutely.
And what we do with it, because it is a question of belief, what we do with it has to be left up to every individual reader, and whether or not you believe in Rama as God, it is still such a magnificent story. And it is so beautifully told by Valmiki that I think it's really daft, to reject Ramayana because you're struggling with some of the things that Rama does.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I read this, I wondered how, because I was reading the Shurpanakha episode, which is, we can talk about them when we do the next session of that. But I wanted to kind of say that I read the Kamban, the episode, and he treats it completely differently. There's a very mellow, almost slightly loving way in which he talks about Shurpanakha. He really makes her pine and think about Rama, and I thought that's really interesting. Is that how Valmiki's text and post Bhakti, what would happen to the story?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's you think of Tulsi, Ramcharitmanas, and he's not interested at all.
Yeah.
He wants Shurpanakha to be really bad. Whereas Kamban, as you said, there's a softness in the way that he deals with Shurpanakha, and there's a great compassion in the way he deals with Ahalya. Whereas in Valmiki, the Ahalya episode, which of course is in Balakanda, right? And we know that Balakanda and Uttarakanda, of course they were composed later and all that, but when you actually read them, what is shocking is the difference in the Sanskrit. There is no poetry. There is no moments of elevation. It's just like this happened, that happened, this happened, they went there, there's a flatness, or there's an instrumentality to them that the middle books of the Ramayana just simply do not have. So the Ahlia episode is quite matter of fact. I mean, it's in my translation, it's maybe like a page and a half or something, if you really want to go right to the end of the story. So that's about 20 verses, less than 20 verses in Sanskrit, right? And Kamban has this exquisite extrapolation of it. And of course, there's a huge difference that Kamban introduces. In Valmiki Ramayana, the curse, Gautama's curse, makes her formless. She disappears. And it's Kamban who embodies her in a rock. You know, which is so sad. You know, and so then Rama is able to touch her with his foot, no less, to free her from her captivity, as it were, right? Which, of course, presages Sita's captivity and all like that. But in Valmiki, it's like, okay, let's finish this.
But Kamban also does that a lot, no? Doesn't he do it also the first time because he sort of writes about Rama and Sita seeing each other.
It is fully Shringara. It is Shringara, Shringara. Yeah. And it's a common practice even now, you know, in, I will say, very sort of concertedly in Tamil Brahmin families to read Sundarakanda because it is so beautiful. And all these old ladies cry, you know, when they read it, because it is the book of captivity. It is the book of separation. But it is also where Kamban is masterfully in control of his language. And, you know, this is the other thing. In India, we're much more interested in love and separation than we are in love and union. You know, Sita's her captivity moves us so much more than, you know, the joy that she might have had in Rama's presence. You know, so that's weird about us.
I wonder why, though. We should think about this. Think about this.
It's sort of. I don't know, it persuades us that really, if you love somebody, it's only proved when you're not with them. Which is crap. Really. So,
I think, like, also talking about translations, but different kinds of translations. And I think maybe now we can talk a little specifically about your translation. The passage that we chose from Kishkinda, which is, of course, when Rama finally has left the Dandaka forest and he has found Kishkinda, and he has met Vali and Sugriva and Hanuman. There has been all of that. And he is with Lakshmana, waiting for the monsoons to get over. And this is what he says. One day, Rama said, "The rainy season has begun. Look at the sky covered with mountainous clouds. It is as if the sky drank the ocean's essence through the rays of the sun, and after holding it in her womb for 9 months, now puts it forth. You feel as if you could climb up to the sky on this ladder of clouds and place a garland of flowers around the sun. The sky is like a pining lover, the gentle breeze his sighs, the evening clouds, the sandal paste upon his chest, the white clouds, the pallor of his face. The earth parched by the summer heat and now flooded with water reminds me of Sita shedding tears after being scorched by her grief. The mountain covered with flowers is drenched by the rains as Sugriva was drenched in auspicious liquids when he was anointed king. The sky, struck with lightning's golden whip, cries out in pain in a rumble of thunder. And the lightning flashes across the dark clouds makes me think of Sita writhing in Ravana's dark arms. Clouds as big as mountains, which have lightning as their banners and flocks of cranes as their garlands, rumble like rutting elephants upon a battlefield. Cranes are drawn to the clouds by desire and fly around them in formation, like a garland of white lotuses that streams in the wind across the sky. Sleep comes as slowly as a river moving to the ocean, but the crane rushes to the cloud and the woman runs to her lover.
You just have to have great good fortune to be able to translate something like this. You know?
Yes.
Yeah, it's it's such a gift. I mean, can you imagine what it's like when you get this right? You know, you're just like, oh, you have to stop and breathe. You know? So it's amazing when the text gives you something like this. You know, you're just like, thank you.
Yeah. And I think I think we've been talking so far about literary devices and about the poetry within the Ramayana. And I think this really is that, you know.
Yeah, and this is, of course, I mean, in Western categories, this is pathetic fallacy, where nature reflects your emotions. And it's like, wow, man. I mean, this is, I've never read pathetic fallacy like this in any Western text. I just really haven't. And it could be that I haven't read enough. That is possible. But I think my point is made. This is really exceptional.
Yeah, it is.
That thing about, struck by lightning's golden whip, the sky cries out in a rumble of thunder. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Really, really, yeah.
Because it reminds me a lot of the earlier passage, but also because in this you can feel like the humidity of the monsoon. It's sort of seeping into his language. And
absolutely. And of course, I mean, it's particularly painful. Why does Rama think of Sita at this moment in particular? Because monsoon is Shringara Masa. It's the months of union and reunion, because all the men come home. Farmers are not, sowing. They're not plowing their fields. Soldiers come home because there's no war. Traders come home because the rivers are overflowing. All men come home, and this is the season that we wait for. And it is Shringara Masa, and his beloved is who knows where. So the poignancy is sort of multiplied. So yeah.
I was also wondering, when you translate something like this from Sanskrit, how do you capture this imagery? One, of course, in the target language that you're going to translate it into, but also in terms of your process. Do you find that when you're translating, you need to read other material that has been translated?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I read a lot of other translations, especially for difficult passages like this. I mean, it's beautiful and all that, but it takes a lot of work, to translate it. It's much harder than saying, Rama crossed the river in a little boat, and the waves were choppy, and he got to the other side, and he slept under a tree. I mean, that's easy. Anybody can do that. But it's these kinds of passages. So you really, really, really want to know how other people have translated it. You want to, in a sense, you really want to immerse yourself in the images. You have to, you have to be able to see the picture. You have to see the image before you can own it, and translate it for yourself. So so you, of course, I mean, first you read the Sanskrit, then you read all these other translations. Then you read the Sanskrit again. Then you think you're going to die because it's too difficult and other people have already done it better. And then one day you just say, no, I have to do this. And you spend a lot of time polishing. Mainly, I think, when you're translating this kind of visual density, is you start eliminating words as much as you can. You make it tighter and tighter so that, in a sense, your reader, you offer the reader a chance for the image to explode, as a picture, rather than be entirely descriptive, so you have to keep it really tight. And also, because the metaphors are so complex and they're extended over so many lines, you must not give in to that prolixity. So that's where the polishing comes, and that's the best part, actually. Reducing. And I was very lucky with this passage, really, because the images are relatively universal. I mean, everybody knows what thunder is like. Everybody knows what rain is like. everybody knows lightning and, the magic of lightning, the way lightning can be terrifying, but also spectacular. It becomes harder. Like the passage you read before, like what is a kadamba tree, what is a bilva tree, what
Yeah,
is a palm tree,
absolutely.
what is an elephant,
Yeah.
Those are translation choices. I mean, I didn't want to do things like, of course, you don't use the Latinate botanical names,
Yeah.
for flora. That would just destroy the point, right? But also, you're very aware that for many of your readers, whether they're in this country or anywhere, they may not actually know what a rose apple tree is. So just keep it as bilwa, no? I mean, it's some tree that has red fruit. Okay, enough.
Yeah.
That's what you need to know. You don't need to know the specificity of, is it dark red or light red? It's like, no, you know what he's talking about. And you have to allow your reader to surrender to the emotion rather than chase the factual, accuracy of,
Yeah, because I think we talked about this last time also about Gajigamini. Like translating that word for a contemporary audience that would read it.
Or even, Gajigamini is the one that comes obviously to mind, but, Rama had a chest like a lion. What does that mean? What is the chest of a lion? We don't think of a lion. It's pigeon-chested. We don't think of pigeon-chested men as being attractive, right? We think of like, broad shoulders and a flat chest and, the image is one of power and strength and royalty, because sher ka jungle to sher ka raja hai na, sher jungle ka raja hai. That's what we're looking for, right? So we have to make accommodations, and the image is the one that has to lead you, rather than the literal meaning at a time like this.
So. And also trusting the reader.
Oh God,
have the imagination to do it.
Yes. I think that's a real problem. I mean, you develop the courage after many verses of Sanskrit, or translating long texts or making many translations. You develop the courage to trust your reader, because before that, one of the great anxieties for every translator is that somebody who knows Sanskrit will read the text and say, "This is rubbish. That was not there." And it's like, well, it was for me. It doesn't mean that you are inaccurate or that you spin the text. So once you get over that anxiety, that everybody actually who reads your text knows their language better than you do. They don't. Otherwise, they would be reading it in English. They knew Sanskrit. Why would you read an English translation? It's your job to bring the text to them, and to for them to experience the joy that you have experienced, or the sorrow that you have experienced, or the political dissonance that you hear. You have to give that to your reader as well. So
because I really think that reading the Ramayana like this in your translation as poetry, and being reminded, because of the way you translate it so beautifully, that it is poetry. It is. I think that for me, it really let me get under the skin of this story. That's like driven us mad for 2,500 years. It's still thinking about it.
And in that sense, Imran, it's very, whatever we think as 20th and 21st century people, the Ramayana has been politicized in our lifetime in a very particular set of circumstances. Ramayana has always been political. 100 years ago, Periyar was saying, "What is this? This is some Aryan story of, how they Dravidian oppression and all like that." But the story was not written with the politics. So you cannot you cannot lead with the politics of the text. And if you are really sincere and honest in terms of your own relationship with the text, the politics is going to come through. It can't not. Look at the killing of Shambhuka. Look at the banishment of Sita. Look at, look at Mahabharata and Ekalavya. Look at what they do to Karna, the way they destroy Karna in Mahabharata because he's of low birth, right? So you just have to put it out there and your reader will see it,
Yeah.
rather than say, oh, Ramayana is very misogynist, it's very patriarchal. Yeah, it is. Nobody, the translator doesn't need to say that to you.
Yeah.
You will find it for yourself. Yeah.
Okay, we have one more. We actually have two more, I think.
We have a lot more, but it's 8:40. Maybe Alok or some responsible person.
Responsible. Because we won't stop talking. Huh?
They're listening with fascination. Everybody's quiet.
We won't stop talking.
Okay.
So can we do this one?
Yeah,
because
sure.
this is actually in honor of today.
It is.
I
have this enormous tree outside my balcony.
Let's do the last one, Imran. How about that?
This is the last. Okay, this is the last one. Yeah. Okay. And then questions. Sorry, you were saying you have an enormous
tree. No, I have
this
huge tree outside my balcony, for which I'm extremely grateful. But the one problem with my beautiful tree is that
I have the same problem.
It hides the moonrise. So before our session, I actually went out and said, Lady Moon, I'm thinking of you. Be nice to us. And then we got all the technical problems. So Lady Moon was not in a good mood.
Yeah, because I had the same thing. It's right here, but there's a huge tree that blocks it, but I can see like little glimmers of it.
Yes.
What is it that he says? Like a swan gliding on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is in honor of the talk. Yeah. But also it's just fantastic because now we finally get to think about Hanuman. This is from the Sundarakanda, the Book of Beauty. When Hanuman has arrived in Lanka, after jumping across the ocean. At that very moment, a full moon with its many thousand rays rose up into the night sky, accompanied by a cluster of stars. It flooded the earth with light as if to help Hanuman. And as the monkey watched the moon rise in all its glory, white as a conch shell, white as milk, white as lotus stalks, it reminded him of a swan gliding on a lake. Hanuman entered the city filled with lofty mansions that were like autumn clouds. It was served by the wind and the seas, and from a distance the tumult within the city sounded like the rumbling, swelling ocean. Hanuman climbed onto Lanka's ramparts, which were made of precious metals, and stared in astonishment at the golden gates adorned with pearls and lapis and diamonds, decorated with beaten gold and silver. Hanuman saw the moon, brilliant and shining in the middle of the sky, strutting like a restless bull as it poured its light over the earth. It purifies all beings and made the ocean swell as it lit up everything. Like a white bird in a silver cage, like a lion in its den on Mount Mandara, like a heroic warrior on the back of a proud tusker, the moon shone in the sky. It dispelled the darkness and seemed to leave the gates of heaven wide open as it shone down upon flesh-eating Rakshasas. Sweet music filled the air and fell gently on the ears of virtuous women slept by their husband's side. Other night-stalking Rakshasas who were capable of terrible things were all at play. The wise monkey saw hundreds of houses filled with drunken Rakshasas who seemed unaware of their surroundings. Their houses had chariots and horses and magnificent furniture, and everywhere Hanuman could sense the pride the Rakshasas had in their strength and heroism. All around him, Rakshasas got into drunken brawls. They insulted each other and gesticulated with their sturdy, powerful arms. They ranted and raved in their intoxication. They threw out their chests with pride and clasped their beloved women in their arms, pressing them against their bodies. Hanuman saw beautiful women anointing themselves and others who were asleep. Hanuman saw exquisite women who appeared to be high-minded, virtuous, and pure. They shone like stars, absorbed in their lovers and in drinking. He saw other women who were illuminated by their own beauty, but they were shy and hid in their lovers' arms, like birds clinging to their mates, enjoying a night of bliss. He saw still others on the terraces of their mansions, sitting in their lovers' laps in the throes of passion. He saw women with smooth complexions, bare-breasted, with skin the color of molten gold. Others with skin like moonlight. Some were alone without lovers. Some went out to meet their lovers, anticipating a night of ecstasy. And others were satisfied with the lovers who came to their home.
What a poet, man.
What a
Really,
poet.
really.
What a translator.
Oh, well, I got lucky. I really got lucky. Yeah. It's easy to translate beautiful things. Well, it's not easy. It's very hard, but you work at it because you want everybody to feel what you're feeling. So, yeah.
This Sundara Kanda is
too good.
So, like, I've always wanted to ask you, everything else is, all the other books are kind of named by a central event. What is with Sundarakanda? The place of all our troubles, no?
Yeah, well, the books are all named for places, really, or space or time. Even childhood is a location in a sense. And then there's this middle book, Sundara, and I remember, when I was translating, all the other books are translated by English nouns: wilderness, war, Ayodhya, whatever. And I wanted a noun. I didn't want it to be the beautiful. And I had my friend Laurie Patton, who we studied together with Wendy, and she had come on a Fulbright to India. She was doing her Sanskrit work and all like that. And I was like, Laurie, man, I wanted to mean beauty. And she said, but it doesn't. And I was like, but I wanted to. And she did the most amazing thing for me. She had access to the Deccan College dictionary project. The Sanskrit dictionary, which they've been creating for 40 years, right? And in the 90s, they had reached long E. So they'd done O, R, E, E, and it's like, okay, it'll be another couple of generations.
Yeah.
Anyway, Laurie went to the scriptorium, and the scriptorium is an astounding place because it's just like, little boxes filled with pieces of paper written by hundreds and hundreds of Sanskritists over 30 or 40 years, annotating, the first use of this word, what is the root, what is it, it's an amazing, amazing, completely mental project. And she found a reference to Sundara used once as a noun. And she said, look, somebody's done it. You could do it. You could make it mean beauty. And I will never, ever forget that she gave me that possibility. But, it's always haunted me, the fact that I actually pushed back against this language because I wanted it to mean something that it didn't commonly mean. And it turns out Sundara, who is Sundara? And in the South, everybody is clear that Sundara is Hanuman. That it's a name for him. He is the beautiful one, right? I thought it was Lanka. I thought because it really is a book about the women, that beauty refers to the beauty that we experience as readers in that text because of what Hanuman sees and the way he describes it and all like that. But in South, as we say in South, we don't say in the South, we say in South, we know that Sundara is Hanuman. So, and it is his book. It really is his book. It's his own mini epic within a larger epic. It has the form, it has the structure, it has the content. It's just this beautiful little jewel that's embedded at the heart of and it really is the heart of the Ramayana.
Because also because the descriptions of this city, it's just outstanding. And to think of, I know you've said this, is that the further we move from Ayodhya, the more fantastic everything becomes. And I think this is that point when it becomes really, really fantastic.
And it must, because it is the oppositional city. It is a city that belongs to Rama's antagonist, the enemy. So it has to be everything that Ayodhya isn't. So it's a city of lushness and excess and indulgence and sensuality and decadence even, We're supposed to read it as decadence, but in fact we read it as beauty. Just goes to show who we are. Give me more.
But also about the women, they're all there by their own free will, and it's very open. And when you think about the women of Ayodhya, maybe not so much Kishkinda because they're also very free, but this is And I
Yeah.
know that even the descriptions of Lanka were just in Sanskrit are described as the shape of a woman's body.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And of course, that all has implications for what Ravana is, that he's lustful, that he's driven by sexual desire. Of course, all of those things are true.
Mm.
And it is also, of course, the place where Sita is captive. So the symbolic resonance of Lanka has to be as a woman, because Rama's conquest of Lanka is actually his recovery, the rescue of his wife.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as we were saying earlier, the text is really smart.
Yeah.
Whoever's writing the text knows what is going on.
Yeah.
And knows on every level, not simply in terms of plot and narrative, but in terms of metaphor, in terms of symbolism, in terms of like allegory, nuance. These are very, very accomplished writers, very, very accomplished poets. So,
and also like the Sundara is the most detailed of all the books, no? Because it is the largest of all the books.
No, Yuddha is the biggest.
Yuddha is bigger than
insanely boring. Yeah, but no, I mean the Sundara is detailed. I mean, like you can see the flowers that are carved into the walls. You can feel Sita's abandonment because of the way she's described, the clothes she's wearing, and her hair is in a single braid. And more than anything, you feel Ravana's majesty.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a king, this is truly, truly a king.
Yeah.
And of course, you get to know Hanuman in very, very important ways. Of course, you learn about his courage and his daring and all, but you learn about the endearing monkey side of him, which we're going to talk about next time. I mean, Hanuman, the monkey, rather than Hanuman, the hero. Which is, it's extraordinary, really.
Yeah. But also Valmiki's descriptions, like just to go back to what you were saying, Valmiki's descriptions of Ravana, where he just describes him as this magnificent creature. And then suddenly he'd be like, no, he's not a good guy at all.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of this back and forth, which is
Hanuman is stunned when he sees Ravana, first, lying in bed asleep, and then, of course, when he sees him in his court, when he's captured for, just destroying the city. And as you said, his first thought is like, oh my God, Rama better be good at what he does, because this guy is not a pushover. And then he realizes he's being so destroyed. He's like, oh, sorry. And that's also lovely, because we have exactly the same thought. Right, when we hear the descriptions of Ravana, it's like, ooh, this is a serious opponent, right? And then we realize, no, we're supposed to be on Rama's side in this one. So, so Hanuman is us. He really is us in Sundara.
And also, I mean, Hanuman in this is great. No, and I'd like you to, we're going to talk about this next time, but I really can't help but talk about it now. Is that this interior monologue that he has of.
Save it for next time.
We'll save it for next time. We can't talk about it.
No.
Yeah.
Imran, read the last part also. The last selection you had.
That Arshia.
You want to?
Yeah, Arshia. It's in.
Which one? Which one? Do you want
the one in Uttara. About the rape of Rama.
That, you know what? I'm so unprepared for this that I didn't bring my.
Because I think I also gave my copy away.
Okay, can you hang on just a second? I'll be right back.
Alok, are we good for time? It's 10 to 9.
Yeah, so I mean, we can just read this part and we can end.
Yeah, and then if anyone has questions, we can chat then. This is also about Moonlight.
Oh, lovely.
So
the last part was beautiful. Stunning.
Here I am. Sorry. Okay. So, as I said, the Uttarakanda is really a terrible book in terms of its language. But having said that, there is an astounding passage which is also about moonlight. And Ravana, the Uttarakanda spends a lot of time with Ravana convincing us that he's a terrible fellow, because all he does is rape women and, fight with kings and all that. And so this is when he meets Rambha. 10-headed Ravana settled there with his army, which was prepared for battle. As the sun set and the moon rose, white as the mountain itself, Ravana saw the mountain made radiant in the moonlight with its trees, its divine groves of Karnikara and thickets of Kadamba, its pools of water from the river Mandakini, which were filled with blooming lotuses. He heard a beautiful sound, like a bell. It was the sound of Apsaras singing in the house of the Lord of Wealth. Stirred by the wind, trees rained their flowers upon the mountain, perfuming it with the fragrances of springtime. The pleasant breeze, carrier of the fragrance of honey and pollen from the flowers, increased Ravana's desire. The singing, the abundance of flowers, the cool breeze, the beauty of the mountain, and the rising moon all increased his lust. Mighty Ravana was spellbound by the arrows of love. He gazed at the moon and sighed again and again. At that very moment, Rambha arrived there. She was the best of all the Apsaras. Her face was like the full moon, and she was adorned with celestial flowers. Decorated with special designs of fresh flowers from all 6 seasons, she was veiled in a cloth as blue-black as a rain cloud. Her face was like the moon, her brows like beautiful bows, her thighs like an elephant's trunk, her hands like blooming lotuses. Ravana saw her as she passed through the army camp. The Rakshasa king, overwhelmed by the arrows of love, rose and grabbed her by the hand as she walked shyly by. He smiled and said, "Where are you going, my lovely? What have you planned for yourself? Whose lucky time has come that he gets to enjoy you? Who are you going to satisfy tonight? Who shall drink the nectar of your lips, fragrant with lotus and lily? Who shall touch these breasts of yours, my pretty one, like golden urns and so tightly pressed together? Your hips are lovely, as wide as a golden circle themselves and encircled by a golden belt. Who shall mount into these heavens tonight? There is no one more virile than me, not Indra, not Vishnu, and not the Ashwins. It's not good, pretty one, that you try to go past me. Rest here on this beautiful rock, wide-hipped lady. I alone am the lord of the 3 worlds. There is no one that compares to me. 10-headed Ravana, lord of the 3 worlds, pleads with you like this, with his palms joined. Accept me. Rambha trembled and clasped her hands together. She replied, I beg you, do not speak to me in this way. You are my elder. You should protect me from others if I'm sexually assaulted, for by rights I'm your daughter-in-law. What I'm saying is the truth. And she stood there with her head bowed low. And Ravana said to her, you are my daughter-in-law only if you are my son's wife. And so it goes on. But basically it's about how the moonlight can also be a sight, as it were, of evil, of violence, and not just of beauty. But he is driven to this great passion by the moon. So,
because it's a really, I think that the contrast between the way Hanuman has seen the moon and this there's a huge difference between those two ways of seeing it.
Yeah, no, so I mean, again, it's in the eye of the beholder. Hanuman allows the moon to show him beauty, which he sits back and adores, as it were. And Ravana allows the moonlight to show him beauty, which he must possess, at any cost. And of course, with violence.
Because it also reminded me a little bit of the first time Ravana sees Sita. and his description of her, which
Yeah.
is very much a male gaze, which you don't
Yes,
see
my
at
God.
all.
Yeah. And it's amazing also that the Ramayana retains that, because
Absolutely.
it's becoming, over the centuries, it becomes more and more puritanical as a text. And here we have just, that really, and that rapacious male gaze, I want this,
Absolutely. Wow. Alok, shall we?
Wake up.
I release you.
We have been
God, I can't believe.
We had a whole discussion. We said that this is totally a gin and tonic friendly space. That we don't compromise that. Okay, guys. Listen, guys, that was really, really utterly fascinating. It was wonderful. It's 9 o'clock. We can have a 10 minutes of conversation if anybody has any questions or comments. We've had a dedicated audience for a good 1.5 hours.
Yeah, nobody left. That's amazing.
If no one has any questions, I think we're all just kind of like absorbing all the information. It's been amazing. It's just fascinating. And today's session was so much different than the last time. I really liked the kind of how we went into a lot of it. It was really nice. And I'm really excited for the guys. We're going to meet again on December 21st for the third session in the series. But it's not a full moon night, unfortunately. We couldn't.
We'll be done with the moonlight by then.
We're done with the moon,
And I don't see any comments, so I'm going to try and wind up. It's also been 9 o'clock, so I think we want to go back to dinner and stuff. So, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Thus is based out of Goa, and we are a small collective, and in fact, we're running a small fundraiser on Milap. We have a small budget, and we need to reach the target to be talks operational and keep them running every Monday. So please make a donation if you can, and see you guys, and follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. We bring really exciting programs every Monday, and I'll see you guys again with Arshia and Imran once again on the 21st. Thank you guys so much. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Imran and Thus and everyone. Thank you, everybody who stayed to listen. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.